Welcome back to the Don McKay Show here on RadioOnFire.com. Of course, Don McKay in here holding down. And I am joined in studio by one of the top defense attorneys in Baltimore City. Okay? He is the senior partner of Bates and Garcia, law firm that he started back in 2006. Okay? Got to start working as a prosecutor in the Baltimore City's State's Attorney Office. Okay. Since that time, he's been involved in many of the city's recent high-profile cases and has even argued a case before the highest court in the land, serving as the co-counsel in Maryland versus Blake before the U.S. Supreme Court. So show some respect. All right. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Ivan Bates. How you doing, sir?
Hey, my brother. How you doing?
Wonderful, wonderful. Glad that you could join us. A couple of things that I wanted to talk about. And today, I mainly want to discuss the Gun Trace Task Force. Of course, that's something that you are familiar with.
Yes, very, very familiar with them.
So, back in 2016, on my birthday, actually, which is August the 10th, the investigation of the Baltimore City Police Department was released and completed by the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Okay, and it was troubling. It was very troubling. Myself being someone that has grown up between Baltimore and Atlanta, I was not surprised by the findings, but when you get into the depths of the task force, some of those crimes surprised me. So just to throw out a couple of things. So according to the Department of Justice, after a thorough investigation initiated at the request of Baltimore City Police Department, the Department of Justice concludes that there is reasonable cause to believe that the BPD engages in a pattern of practice conduct that violates the Constitution and federal law. And then they went to name some things that actually we found out that the task force was doing. How did you become aware of this Gun Trace Task Force?
It's interesting. When we talk about the Gun Trace Task Force, that's just a small snippet of it was really the plainclothes police officers. Not all of them, but so they had a number of different units. I became a private defense attorney back in 2002. And I think it's probably around 2003, 2004 is when I first saw a plainclothes officer, and that was Sergeant Keith Gladstone, on the witness stand in which he wasn't actually truthful. Then the city solicitor, our current city solicitor, was a former federal judge, Andre Davis. So Judge Davis was the one who called this police officer and called him in a lie. At that moment in time, Judge Davis threw the case out. I'd never really seen that in federal court. And then the U.S. attorney asked Judge Davis not to say he was a liar, but more or less that he was mistaken. So Judge Davis changed his ruling, and that to me kind of opened the doors for what we see today, the current Gun Trace Task Force. From 2003, then 2006, 7, 8, 9, I saw a couple of officers not telling the truth. 2010 is when I saw the head of the Gun Trace Task Force was Sergeant Wayne Jenkins. Then he was an officer who worked with then Sergeant Keith Gladstone. Remember, Keith Gladstone was the first officer I'd really witnessed not being truthful on the witness stand, him and an officer named Thomas Wilson. And then from there, I had two cases with Keith Gladstone and Wayne Jenkins at that time period. One where they stole a bunch of money from my client. They broke into his house. His wife was afraid, and she hit the panic button on the alarm system. The real officers came, and they were shushed away by the fake officers, I call them, the corrupt cops. And eventually, I was able to prove that happened. The state's attorney's office threw that case out. Then I also had a case with those two officers where they lied on this poor woman, and she was found guilty of having a handgun that she was taking to a gun buyback program, and the judge sent her to jail for a year. So they were really on my radar. And this is 2010. 2013, 14, eventually Wayne Jenkins has his own division. Keith Gladstone retires, comes back. And 2013, 14, that's the time period I really was focused on Wayne Jenkins. Out about, all total, I've probably had with Wayne Jenkins, I've had about between 30-some to 40-some cases with Sergeant Wayne Jenkins or Wayne Jenkins in his career. So the more he began to do, the more I began to eventually say, you know what, someone's got to do something. And eventually they did. In 2014, then State's Attorney Greg Bernstein, his office basically shut down Wayne Jenkins, reported him to Baltimore City Police Department for lying and planting evidence. And they had the evidence and information. They took it to the grand jury, but the grand jury didn't indict. So they stopped him being an officer in 2014. Fast forward to 2015, you know, life's different. We have a new state's attorney. That state's attorney looks in the file, I guess, or whomever, and they decide Wayne Jenkins can testify because they allow Wayne Jenkins to go back on the street and he's testifying. At that moment in time, I'm beginning to get cases involving Wayne Jenkins. I'm realizing what he's doing. I go to Internal Affairs in 2014. They don't want to do anything. I go to BPD, the Baltimore City Police Department, in 2015. They don't do anything. I write the current state's attorney a letter about the corruption of the police department in 2015. They don't do anything. I talked to our prosecutors in 2015. They still don't do anything. So at that moment in time, I decided I needed to do something. So I was involved with one case. It was a high-profile case, and I would do that case during the day. In the afternoon, I would go in the evenings to the jails and to visit people to see if they had Wayne Jenkins or the members of the Gun Trace Task Force on their paperwork. Because at first there was a number of different plainclothes officers. You call it SES, SOS, didn't matter the name. Eventually what Wayne Jenkins was able to do, he was able to take what I view the worst of the plainclothes officers, put them under one umbrella organization, Gun Trace Task Force, and then he was able to go exert terror on the streets. No one seemed to care. No one really knew what was going on, but I began to study them little by little by little. And it was interesting. The case that I was doing was the case involving one of the officers involving the Freddie Gray incident. I took a lot of heat for that. However, representing that particular officer, which was Sergeant Alicia White, I learned more from representing her. That gave me the opportunity and the window to understand how the police department trained their officers. And so what I realized is the reason we kept losing, and we always lose police cases, is because no one knows how the police are trained and no one knows how to prepare their cases to go and battle the police. So once I had that information, I was able to understand. For me, I needed one, to understand their rules and regulations, meaning the police. I did that. Number two, I need to stay a step ahead of the police. I did that because I had my own investigator. And number three, I realized if I put all the reports together, Wayne Jenkins, it was the same thing. It was basically cut and paste. So I was able to
same
have
actions,
same words, same everything. And that's how I was able to build a case against Sergeant Wayne Jenkins. Eventually, I had three big cases, one of which was a really high-profile case just in terms of the evidence, a lot of drugs, a lot of money, and I knew that case was important. The state's attorney's office didn't listen. The police department didn't listen. I had to find a way to get a case to the federal government to have them listen. And I had this one case that I knew would eventually get me to the federal government. However, I had a detective go interview the witnesses. And there was one witness in particular who was an amazing witness, an older African-American female who was retired school teacher, the type of witness that you want to have
Absolutely.
for a case because you know she'll be believed. So I filed all my motions and we have court. Wayne Jenkins walks in and I had my witness sitting right there that he'd walk past when he walked in the courtroom. So I filed two motions. One was to say there was a legal stop. And if I lost that, then we talk about the house. Wayne Jenkins stopped my client. They stole money from my client, took his car keys. They go to his house and they stole a bunch of money from his safe. And they stole a large amount of drugs as well from his house. At that moment in time, when Wayne Jenkins saw this young lady sitting there, he knew, quote unquote, as I said, the jig was up. So he went on the witness stand and he, quote unquote, lied through the case. He basically admitted to violating my client's constitutional rights, where I won the case. And I wondered why Wayne did that. And I quickly realized it was because he saw that witness and he didn't want us talking about the house, because we found out later, and I knew this, that Wayne had stolen $100,000 cash from my client's house. At that moment in time, the case was so big and high profile, a few months later, the federal government reached out to my client. My client and I, we went over to the U.S. Attorney's office, and you have to sit down and talk to them when they reach out to you.
Yeah.
I had been compiling information about Wayne Jenkins and his activities. I gave the U.S. Attorney's Office a file of about 8 to 10 cases, and then I was able to take about 8 clients and former clients to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they were able to tell their stories. From there, the U.S. Attorney's Office used that information along with other information. They compiled the cases, and they actually took down the Gun Trace Task Force. Wayne Jenkins is doing 25 years, and all the rest of the officers are doing from 8 years to 25 years. So when I talk about the Gun Trace Task Force, in life as a lawyer, you kind of figure out what's going to be my big case. Yeah, I did the Freddie Gray case. I represent Michael Johnson and Felicia Barnes case. I took a case before the U.S. Supreme Court. So I've had an amazing career. But there's no case that really made more sense to me than, I don't view it as a case, but the cause. So as a defense attorney, you defend people, but your cause is to make sure they're constitutionally protected. So for me to be able to fight the entire system, remember, it just wasn't the state's attorney's office, it was the police department. The system failed the people. And to take and on the system and to win, that was truly an amazing, for me, the greatest victory I've ever had in my entire career.
And it's a big victory. What would cause the powers that be to turn a blind eye to corruption in the police department?
Well, I think we have to go back and remember 2015. In 2015, the city had suffered through the unrest. There was a terrible relationship between the state's attorney's office and the police department. And I think, do you really want to continue? The police department, they need arrest. The only group that was really making arrests was the Gun Trace Task Force. We did a breakdown. I had the opportunity to testify in Annapolis amongst the numbers. In 2015, when Wayne Jenkins and his crew came on the scene, they did, I think, 342 arrests for handguns. Or for
342.
That's at least almost one a day. And they're not working every single day. So they're making the arrest. Now, if you're the police, you trot them out to say, we're making an arrest. And we found the state's attorney's office was going out and saying, well, you know what? We're making arrests. We're keeping the people safe. Because remember, the murder rate's going through the roof.
Right.
So both sides really don't care what's going on as long as they can tell their narrative. And then their narrative is like, I have a 97% conviction rate. We took 11 guns off the streets this weekend. So their narrative was, this is what's really going on. So they knew what was happening, but they totally turned a blind eye. The system didn't care. Now, also remember, I've had prosecutors say, well, they're criminals, so who cares? So the problem was...
They've said this in court?
They've said that to me one-on-one.
Okay.
And so we took a deeper dive and looked at those numbers. I looked at 100 people out of 342 just randomly. 25 of the 100 we looked at had never, ever been arrested and had no criminal history as an adult until the Gun Trace Task Force arrested them. So 25% of the people that they were arresting, quote unquote, weren't criminals, had no criminal history.
Right.
But really, does it matter whether or not you have a criminal history at all? The Constitution is supposed to protect everybody.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter who you are.
Absolutely.
So what you have is the system just didn't care about the people. And, it's interesting. I had a case in which I had body camera footage. I had a client who was stopped not too far from up the street across Druid Hill Park. There's that gas station right up the street from the park near Park Sausage.
Yep.
He was stopped there. And the police have body camera footage. Now, body camera footage, you're supposed to turn it on the second you approach the person.
Right.
They didn't turn the body camera footage on until after the arrest and said, here's a gun and here are drugs. What's interesting, my client's adamant, those are not my gun and drugs. On the video, Wayne Jenkins tells my client, hey, I don't care about the gun and drugs. I want something bigger. Just let me know. We can go around the corner and talk. My client said, no, you got to take me to jail. So Wayne Jenkins finds this bogus reason to say they arrested him. Oh, you didn't have your seatbelt on. He was in the parking lot of the gas station, but he don't have a seatbelt on. And so they arrest my client, but they don't turn off the body camera footage. So you hear them talk about how they're going to beat my client up. You watch them go in my client's house without a search and seizure warrant. And he lived directly across the street from Western District Police Department. So they didn't care. I received that body camera footage from the state's attorney's office. I say, hey, your officer who found the guns and drugs has a prior conviction for stealing money and for planning drugs previously. Why are you using him? The state's attorney says, oh, we're not going to call him as a witness. We're going to call the other officer who had the body camera footage. That was Detective Herschel, and anybody on the east side knows Detective Herschel was the worst of the worst. So that's who they want to call as their witness. So then I say, hey, let me tell you something. How are you going to get past the fact they broke in my client's house without a warrant? They just took his keys and went in. The prosecutor says on the record, I don't understand how that relates to the guns and drugs. So what I realize I'm dealing with is a person, one, who don't care, doesn't want to care, and his supervisors don't care. So I pull him to the side. I said, man, this looks really bad. And his response to me was, look, all I know is my supervisors told me we had to get convictions. So that's what this was about. This was convictions because, once again, like the DOJ report said, right, they're poor black people. They no one care about them. So he then later says, I never realized what was really going on. Well, this prosecutor has been a prosecutor for about 2 years. How do you not realize? You don't need a law degree to understand someone goes in your house without a warrant, that's a break and an entry. That's a burglary.
Absolutely.
So what I realized was you just had a system of individuals that wanted to tell the public one thing, but something else totally was going on, because at the end of the day, they were politicians. They cared about what was going on. They cared about the statistics. They didn't care about what the police were doing.
So many people feel this, and I don't know whether or not you actually know the answer to this, but from what you've seen, is there a quota for arrests that's required?
I do feel that, in reference to the Gun Trace Task Force, from what I've heard, is that if they had so many arrests, they would get money. They would get little bonuses. They would get days off. And so do you call that a quota per se, or do you call that an incentive? And i.e., once they know they're going to get a little extra money, they're going to do a little extra something. And then they didn't watch what they were doing. They just let them do whatever they wanted to. And remember, it's a system of checks and balances. Just because the police are running wild, you have the state's attorney's office. We found out which was deeper. 6 out of every 10 arrests that the Gun Trace Task Force made, those cases were dismissed basically because those officers were refusing to come to court. So the state's attorney's office had the numbers and the figures, but they just never ever analyzed them to say, wow, this is really wrong.
Yeah.
You know, once we began to really look at the numbers and the figures, it was so obvious and glaring what was going on. The police wanted one thing: arrest. That's all they wanted. But if you look at it from a larger standpoint, the state's attorney's office wants to say we have a 97% conviction rate. So even though you're dismissing, 6 out of 10 of their cases, they're not counting the null process as against the conviction rate. So if you're getting 4 out of every 10 as convictions, that's what they're counting in the 97%. They're not counting all the cases that you've dismissed because the officers didn't show up for court. So therefore, the police have what they want, which is arrest, and the state's attorney's office has what they want, i.e. conviction rates.
Right.
So once both parties have what they want, they really didn't care about the actual people. They didn't care that you were breaking up homes. They didn't care that people were going to jail. They didn't care that people were robbed. They didn't care that people had their life savings taken. They didn't care that sometimes the drug dealer didn't have the money to pay the plug. All of a sudden now they're murdered. Those were things that just did not care about, because just one dirty cop can have that much of a profound impact on the system and on people's lives.
And speaking of the people, you're talking about some of your clients and what could be done for the victims of the corrupt cops.
Back in June, I had the opportunity to go down to Annapolis and speak to this commission put together by the legislature. And one of the things that I suggest is there needs to be a fund to reimburse these individuals. And the fund needs to be funded by the state. But also, let's sit down and maybe look at some of the money in reference that you gave the police and things like that. What about all the monies you get from the fines of the police department? What about all those types of things? So they need to put, to me, money in a fund to make sure they reimburse the individuals that were arrested and had guns planted, the individuals to make sure that they have the lawyers who can clean up their records and get them back, and the individuals that have lost their houses, they've lost so many things. And let's put the money in a fund to make sure that not only can they be reimbursed financially, but they want to have job training and drug treatment, that the money's also there to make sure they can help them with that.
Right. So is this something that you think could happen?
I do. It seemed like it was an idea that they liked. This was the commission. I think the more people that talk about the Gun Trace Task Force, the more people that know about the Gun Trace Task Force, the more pressure they put on them. It's interesting. I read an article by this writer named Baynard Woods, who's been covering the Gun Trace Task Force a great deal. And I guess in the article, he had spoken to the current city solicitor, Andre Davis, and one of the attorneys that has a case. So they want to have a case go before the Court of Appeals, and that's in the state of Maryland. That's the highest court, like the Supreme Court of other states. And they want a federal case and a state case, and they want to bring the case together so that they can get a ruling to say whether or not the city is responsible for officers do criminal activity when they're on duty. And so to me, one, I understand why the city would do that, but I think it's terrible because as far as I'm concerned, the city knew that Wayne Jenkins had corrupt issues. They knew that he had IED problems. They knew that the other officers had all these IED issues.
Yeah.
So how are you not going to be responsible and you put them back on the street knowing who they are? And so to me, I think when I look at the larger picture, I feel that we need to stay woke, because I think the system is going in the back door to make sure that they punish the people because they stood up for their own cause.
So what can we do as private citizens to help monitor some of this activity? Like, how can we prevent this from happening again?
One of the things I think people have to really understand what the Gun Trace Task Force was about. People need to understand that just because they arrested individuals, some of which did have criminal records, don't think that you were not potentially having the opportunity to be a victim as well. That's right. The first thing. Understanding that it just wasn't them, that it could have also, quote unquote, been you.
Yes.
The next thing I think that people have to understand is they have to really ask questions. Reach out when you go vote, and voting is important.
Definitely. Find
out with your state legislature. Find out what their feelings about the Gun Trace Task Force, and do they believe that they should actually make sure that they take care of the individuals that have gone through this. Also, we have a mayoral election coming up. Yes. Ask the mayoral candidates, do they feel that what the city solicitor is doing and not wanting to pay individuals that have been treated poorly by the Gun Trace Task Force is something that they would support? I mean, ask those questions, because once people exercise their power at the ballot box and they start to, elect individuals that want to hold people accountable, that's when you'll see a change. That's when you'll never have the Gun Trace Task Force. Now, remember, the mayor was in charge of the police department. They were in charge of the police commissioner. They were in charge when all this was happening. So the mayor, to me, also has to accept some credit and say, hey, you're responsible for this as well. And I mean, and I'm not just trying to beat up all the police, because there were some really good police officers. And some of the officers, they also did things to try to talk about and bring down the Gun Trace Task Force as well. But what we found out was a lot of the plainclothes officers, they used this as an opportunity to do whatever they wanted to in some of these specialized units that Wayne Jenkins specifically worked with. And there were still some good plainclothes officers that did a good job in other units. But the ones who worked with Wayne Jenkins, that's what he knew. That's what he was about. They knew what he was about, and they decided to work with him. And so, to me, making sure you train the officers properly, making sure you watch the officers properly, and making sure that the police, understand and keep track of the hours and the overtime.
Definitely.
And have the state's attorney's office really just do their job and monitor the police and not just believe the word of every officer because it's a police officer. But take the time, and when a defense attorney brings you some information and it's on body camera footage, at least take the time to sit down and look at it and review it. And just those simple things there, I think the system would have changed dramatically.
Yeah, because I suppose that judges, police officers usually make good witnesses for the judges.
They do.
And because of the amount of danger that they're in on a daily basis, people tend to give them the benefit of the doubt in a court proceedings.
Yes.
So I'm sure that is tough. A tough obstacle to overcome.
Well, also, I think the courts, someone asked me who's at fault here, and I broke it down like this. 50% of the blame goes to the police department. These are their officers. 45% of blame goes to the state's attorney because they were the last line, and they were that line of defense to make sure they protected the citizens. And I got to give 5% to the judges because the judges sat there on the bench and they listened to those officers tell those lies. And sometimes as a judge, you may have missed 1 or 2 points, but sometimes we want to, and I've seen judges want to give the benefit of the doubt to the officer just because they're the officer.
Right.
Now, I'm saying you just don't beat the officer up because they're a police officer, but treat them the same way you treat anybody else and evaluate them. I know a lot of times the judges said that we do that, but I found a lot of times when it came to Wayne Jenkins, they did not.
Are you being a little hard on the prosecutor?
Well, no. I was a prosecutor before, so I know.
But I mean, so from the standpoint of them kind of giving the benefit of the doubt to the officer when they're presenting the case.
The prosecutor?
Yes.
Well, see, the reason I'm hard on the prosecutor is because the prosecutor had memorandums of the officer's line.
Right.
The prosecutors had the documentation, the paperwork of the officer being convicted.
Right.
So the prosecutors knew who their witnesses were, and the prosecutors would decide, I'm not going to use this officer, I'm going to use this officer over here. So to me, it's the moldy bread analogy.
Yeah.
Where if you find mold on a piece of bread, then most likely there's going to be additional mold that you may not see right away, but it's going to be there. So if you have 2 or 3 officers that have issues of credibility problems, and you know it because you've given us the paperwork, you pretty much need to realize this whole crew has issues. And you just can't selectively say, yeah, I know they were the ones that found the guns or the drugs, but I'm going to put this one guy over here that doesn't have an issue on. And that to me is why I give the prosecutors grief about this. It'd be different if they didn't have the paperwork. It would be different if they didn't know. Remember, Wayne Jenkins basically had his internal affair records. Wayne Jenkins' internal affair records noted that he had done this previously. There was a prosecutor in 2014 that listened to a defense attorney and pulled up Wayne Jenkins up and gave the information to their supervisors, and he was put on the do not call list, and they weren't calling Wayne Jenkins. So for me, when I talk about prosecutors are that last line of defense, and I watched the prosecutor do her job the proper way, and she sat Wayne Jenkins down. When she eventually left the state's attorney's office, that's when Wayne Jenkins came back into play. So they knew who he was because they watched him and they'd seen the videotape.
He had a history. He definitely had a history. So I know that you are busy with your practice.
Yes.
What does the future hold for you?
Right now, I'm in federal court an awful lot. I have a case that I'll be doing out in L.A. We've been doing a case in Pennsylvania, another case in Colorado. So I've been going around the country doing more cases. Another thing I've been doing a lot is staying in the community. And I spend as much time with my family as possible. I have a 3-year-old daughter who runs me ragged. And, for me, it's just spending time with the family, being in the community, serving the community, helping the community. I have some things that I'm doing for a number of people. Looks like we're going to be able to do a book bag giveaway for through some of the churches coming up.
Wonderful.
So I'm just trying to do things to just be a part of the community, be a part of the solution instead of the problem.
That's important. Any special announcements? Any announcements you want to make?
Nah,
No? Okay.
The announcement I want to make.
All right.
I'm just gonna give a plug if you don't mind. The Bates
Absolutely.
and Garcia, my law firm. We do criminal defense. We do civil cases. We are involved in a number of civil lawsuits. We do PI work. If you have an opportunity, it's 410-814-4600, or follow me on Twitter at Ivan J. Bates or Instagram at Ivan J. Bates. And just have an opportunity to find out a lot about what I'm doing and different cases I'm involved with.
Absolutely, absolutely. I really appreciate you coming and talking about this. I mean, it's something that is important. The relationship between the law enforcement and the community is very important, and things like this can weaken or strengthen that relationship. And I definitely applaud you and others like you that are in that fight.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Make sure you tell Deanna something.
I will. I'll tell him. Definitely. So, of course, we will be back tomorrow. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, at The Diamond K Show, at Radio on Fire. And we'll be back tomorrow.